wanted you to find this place. Not on any map, not in any archive, not even in your own memory. Because once you understand what was removed, you start questioning everything that was left behind. There is a cabin, real, physical, standing in the Appalachian wilderness that does not exist on any official record. Not government maps, not land registries, not military surveys. Nothing. And that's not an accident. That's control. You've been taught that maps are truth, that what is documented is what exists, that if something isn't recorded, it simply isn't real. But that belief is the first layer of the system. Because power doesn't just control what you see, it controls what you're allowed to know exists. In 1887, a federal survey team pushed into a section of North Carolina that had never been fully charted. Their mission was simple: measure the land, define it, own it through documentation. That's how nations work. They don't conquer land with guns first. They conquer it with maps, lines, labels, authority. And anything that cannot be mapped becomes a threat. The deeper they went into those mountains, the more something felt wrong. Not in a way they could explain, just a pressure, a silence that didn't feel empty, but occupied, like something was aware of them, watching them move deeper into a place they weren't meant to fully understand. Then they saw it. Smoke, thin, controlled, rising from a place that, according to every official document, was empty, uninhabited, impossible. But when they pushed through the trees, they found it. A cabin. Not abandoned, not ruined, maintained, alive. And that's where the system broke. Because in that moment, reality split into two versions, the one recorded on paper and the one standing right in front of them. And only one of those was allowed to exist. That's when the real question began. Not who lives there, but something far more dangerous. Why was it erased? Because things don't just disappear from official history. They're removed, deliberately. And once you start seeing that, you realize something most people never do. The map you trust is not designed to guide you. It's designed to limit you. And that cabin, it wasn't just missing. It was hidden on purpose from people like you.
The cabin seemed ordinary at first glance. Rough-hewn logs stacked carefully, a stone chimney curling a thin plume of smoke, a small garden meticulously tended, chickens pecking in the dirt. But ordinary is a mask. It conceals the extraordinary. It hides the truths that would make your blood run cold if you let them surface. The man who emerged from its doorway was older than the mountains themselves, or at least that's how he appeared. Stooped, white hair tangled, eyes pale and sharp as ice, staring not at them, but through them. There was no surprise in his gaze, no alarm, only recognition. Recognition that outsiders had finally stumbled upon what was meant to remain invisible. He spoke in a voice like dry leaves, soft, brittle, and cutting. "Surveyors, not seen your kind this far in." The team's leader, Thomas Holt, introduced himself with the precision of a man trained to rely on facts, charts, and numbers. He showed his instruments, the theodolite gleaming in the fading sun, the rolled maps in his satchel, all symbols of authority, all meaningless here. The old man's eyes lingered on them, calculating, as though weighing their worth, or perhaps weighing their souls. And then Holt asked the question that would change everything. "Your cabin, it's not on any map, nor any record we've seen. How long have you been here?" The old man's laugh was a rasping, unsettling sound. "Long enough. Before your maps, before your records. That's all that matters. The mountains, they don't care for paper. They care for roots." The words sounded benign at first, poetic even, but embedded in them was a warning, a philosophy that existed outside bureaucracies, outside control, outside law. He was a man, and his home was a place untouchable by the systems designed to define the world. Holt felt a chill, because what he was beginning to understand in that instant was far larger than any unmapped cabin. Some things are erased for convenience. Some things are erased to hide power. Some things are erased to hide crime. And the old man, he wasn't hiding from nature. He was hiding something, a history that didn't belong in textbooks, a truth that would unsettle anyone who dared dig too deeply. The team stayed that night. The forest around them felt alive, breathing, listening. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, every distant howl of an owl became amplified, a silent chorus reminding them that they were intruders, that some secrets are protected, not by locks or walls, but by fear itself. By sunrise, Holt's mind had already begun connecting threads no one else could see, threads that led to a name whispered in county records decades ago, a woman, 2 children, gone without explanation. And as the cabin faded behind them, half shrouded in morning mist, Holt realized something horrifying. This was only the beginning. Because the deeper you dig into the forgotten corners of history, the more you discover how much was deliberately buried. And some truths, once unearthed, cannot be unlearned.
Holt's obsession didn't begin with the cabin itself. It began with what wasn't there. Official maps, county records, census ledgers. Every document a testament to civilization's order, and yet this small clearing, this home, this life, had been deliberately erased. It was as if the mountains themselves had conspired with men to scrub history clean. The deeper Holt pressed into the mystery, the more he realized that erasure is never random. A place disappears from a map for a reason. Names vanish from ledgers not because people moved, but because someone wanted them forgotten. Systems of power, hidden and relentless, act quietly, efficiently, and without remorse. And the mountains? They are perfect collaborators, silent, indifferent, impenetrable. Percy Dade, Holt's assistant, noticed the change immediately. Holt's meticulous focus, once on surveying and precision, shifted toward the shadows between the trees, toward gaps in the county records, toward the pale blue eyes of the man who had lived off the grid for decades. Percy's nervous energy, previously charming in its enthusiasm, now vibrated with fear. Something was wrong. Something ancient and patient was hiding in plain sight. Holt returned to Burnsville, poring over old ledgers and plat maps, trying to reconcile reality with records. A name kept appearing in whispered fragments. Clara, a woman, 2 children, vanished decades ago. No death certificate, no relocation, nothing, just silence. And yet Holt's instinct told him that silence was deliberate. Whoever erased her existence had the means to manipulate every official channel, maps, censuses, town records. The absence of evidence was evidence in itself. He confronted Eli Breer, the mountain guide who had led them to the cabin. Greer was a man shaped by the wilderness, stoic and reticent, yet Holt sensed a deep knowledge simmering beneath the surface. "You know," Holt pressed, voice low, "something happened here. You know what became of Clara and the children." Eli's eyes, dark and unblinking, flickered. His hands paused on the leather strap he was mending, and a tension settled over the room like a shroud. Some stories are best left buried. The mountains have a way of protecting their own, and sometimes so do the people. The words carried a weight Holt could not ignore. Protective silence, hidden histories, obsessions buried beneath loyalty and fear. There was a pattern emerging, a system, and Holt felt a cold thrill because he now understood he had stumbled into something far larger than a missing cabin or a vanished family. He had stumbled into a deliberate, organized, enduring manipulation of truth itself. And the unnerving part? Those who enforce the erasure don't need to be violent. They are patient, invisible, untraceable. Their power is in control over perception, over what people are allowed to know, over what is deemed official. Holt felt his heartbeat quicken. He was no longer mapping mountains. He was mapping secrets, plotting connections, following a trail that had been hidden for decades, perhaps centuries. And every clue pulled him further into a web where law, morality, and civilization itself were subordinate to an unseen, unrelenting order. It was intoxicating and terrifying. By now, the shadows of the Appalachian trees seemed alive with purpose, whispering truths that Holt could almost hear. And in that whispering, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Some knowledge, once glimpsed, changes a man forever. This was one of those truths.
That night, sleep eluded Holt. The cabin's walls seemed to breathe around him, expanding and contracting with some unseen rhythm. The fire flickered, casting grotesque shapes that danced across the logs, and he could swear the shadows themselves shifted with intent, curling toward him, recoiling, whispering secrets that were just beyond comprehension. He lay awake, the locket and the doll resting on the small table beside him, objects that now felt less like relics and more like witnesses. Percy snored lightly on his bedroll, oblivious, yet Holt's mind churned. The silence of the cabin pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. Each creak of the logs, each whisper of wind through the hemlocks seemed amplified, deliberate. The mountains were not passive observers, they were archivists, custodians of a history carefully curated, its threads hidden from the world. And Holt was intruding, unraveling the tapestry with the clumsy hands of someone desperate for truth. He turned the locket over again, studying the faded photographs, tracing the outlines of the woman and her children. Questions he didn't know how to ask pressed against his mind like sharp stones. Why had Vance kept these objects hidden? Why erase a family from memory while allowing their tangible traces to linger, almost taunting? Holt realized with a chill that secrecy itself had a logic, a pattern, and it wasn't random, it was calculated, methodical, and perhaps malignant. He rose quietly, not wanting to wake Percy, and moved to the hearth. The loose stone from which he had pulled the doll still sat slightly ajar, as if inviting him to probe further. Holt's hand trembled, not with fear, but with a sense of destiny. Each artifact, each anomaly in the records, each omission in the maps was a breadcrumb, and following them could lead to revelations that were dangerous, life-altering, and irreversible. He thought of the whispers Eli had spoken. Some truths are best left buried. Now Holt understood their weight. In this wilderness, in these mountains, obedience to silence was not just tradition, it was survival. Those who knew too much risked being erased themselves. But Holt could not unsee what he had seen. He could not unknow the impossibility of Vance's existence. He was a ghost, a living paradox, a man outside of recorded time, whose life had been carefully excised from every ledger, every census, every survey. The tension in Holt's chest grew, a slow, burning knot. He realized that every detail mattered. The faint metallic tang in the air after rain, the precise angles of the mountain ridges, the patterns of animal tracks, the smoke curling from the cabin's chimney. They were not just coordinates, they were messages. He was beginning to perceive the invisible architecture of concealment, a network of secrecy spanning decades, perhaps centuries, designed to suppress inconvenient truths. And Holt felt the thrill of power. He was touching something forbidden, a reality beyond maps and records, a truth hidden from all but the persistent. He had stepped into a hidden dimension where time, memory, and morality intersected with human obsession. And he knew, without doubt, that when this knowledge spread, it would alter perceptions, his own and those of anyone willing to see. But knowledge comes with a price. He could feel it crawling along his spine, the weight of unseen eyes, the quiet judgment of the mountains. To know is to inherit responsibility and danger, and Holt now realized he could never turn back. This was no longer just a survey mission. It was a descent, a reckoning.
The next morning, the forest seemed different, more alive, more sentient. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, every distant bird call carried meaning. Holt could feel it in his bones. The mountains were watching him as much as he was watching them. He gathered his instruments, but for the first time their precision felt irrelevant. Charts and maps were no longer the goal. The cabin, Vance, the hidden locket and doll, they were the true survey, the unmarked coordinates of human darkness and omission. Percy, still groggy from restless sleep, frowned at Holt's intensity. "We should stick to the measurements, Holt," he muttered. "Don't make this personal." Holt said nothing, only letting his piercing gaze sweep across the undergrowth. Something invisible lingered in the shadows. The air hung heavy, humid, and sharp, carrying the scent of moss, wet stone, and something else, something metallic, coppery. Holt's pulse quickened. He knew instinctively that this wilderness was a repository of suppressed truths, each one bleeding into the next. They hiked deeper into the forest, following Eli's cryptic guidance. The guide led them with an economy of motion, every step deliberate, silent. Holt's mind raced with fragmented memories of what he had learned, the absence of Vance from every record, the mysterious disappearance of Clara and her children, and the uncanny calm with which the old man recounted her leaving. There was a story there, Holt was certain, a narrative of power, control, and deliberate erasure, and Holt had become part of it. As they reached a narrow ridge, the forest opened slightly, revealing the cabin again in the morning mist. Holt stopped, studying it. The smoke from the chimney now rose straight, unwavering, like a signal. He realized with a jolt the cabin itself was a sentry, a living guardian of secrets, and Vance was both its keeper and its key. Holt felt the pull, an almost magnetic force drawing him forward, demanding understanding, demanding confrontation. He turned to Percy. "Do you see it?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. "Do you understand what this is?" Percy shook his head, uneasy, but Holt didn't need his confirmation. He could feel the truth coiling in the air, dense and pungent, a tangible weight pressing on his chest. This was not just about a missing family or an unmapped cabin. This was about the deliberate shaping of history, about the erasure of human existence from official records, about the absolute power to rewrite reality itself. Holt's thoughts wandered back to the locket and the doll. They were not merely objects, they were testimonies, unrecorded witnesses of life, loss, and concealment. And now they had become instruments of discovery, exposing the hidden architecture of control. Holt's mind, once disciplined by the precision of survey lines, now churned with chaos, obsession, and the dark thrill of forbidden knowledge. As they prepared to descend toward the cabin once more, Holt realized something deeper. The mountains themselves were complicit, patient archivists of the unspeakable. The trees, the streams, the fog, all bore silent witness. And Holt understood, with a shiver, that he had crossed a line. There was no returning to ignorance. Once you see the machinery behind concealment, once you understand the power to erase lives and rewrite existence, you are changed forever. The descent would not just take them back to the cabin, it would plunge them further into darkness. The closer they got to the cabin, the heavier the air became, thick with anticipation and something unnameable, a tension that pressed against the lungs and rattled the mind. Holt noticed details he hadn't before, the way the shadows pooled unnaturally under the hemlocks, the slight tilts in the trees as if bowing toward some unseen authority, the rustle of leaves that didn't belong to the wind. Every step was measured, cautious, but his curiosity outweighed caution. Curiosity now sharpened into obsession. Percy lagged behind, muttering under his breath, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected the mountains themselves to rise and swallow them whole. Holt's gaze was fixed on the cabin, but the mind refused to settle on its familiar shape. Each approach felt different. The morning mist gave the logs a spectral hue. The garden seemed impossibly neat, too deliberate, as if every stalk of corn and bean was a signal, a warning, or a reminder of Vance's omnipotence in this wild domain. The goat chewed quietly, oblivious to the tension, but even its gaze seemed deliberate, evaluating, knowing. Holt remembered Eli's words from the previous night. Some truths are best left undisturbed. He felt their weight now like iron chains around his chest. And yet the knowledge gnawed at him, an itch in the brain that could not be ignored. Who had the right to erase lives? Who could turn human existence into a blank space on the map, and why? The cabin wasn't just missing from the maps, it was deliberately removed from history. Someone wanted it to vanish. Someone wanted the story of Clara and her children erased. Holt's pulse quickened. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. Approaching the cabin door, Holt noticed the subtle changes since yesterday. Faint footprints in the soft earth around the porch, a smudge of soot along the stone chimney, and the faintest creak of a hinge. Vance had been there, aware of them, but deliberately waiting. There was intention in every choice the old man made, a rhythm, a discipline, a control. Holt understood suddenly that Vance was not merely a recluse. He was the architect of this forgotten world, the custodian of its silence, and perhaps the arbiter of human fates within these ridges. Percy whispered, voice trembling, "Holt, I don't like this. Something's wrong. Everything about this place feels wrong." Holt didn't reply, only kept walking. The doll, the locket, the inexplicable erasures, they had become torches lighting a path he could not abandon. He knew now that curiosity had become a mandate. The mountains had summoned him for a reason, as if the forest itself demanded that someone bear witness. And then he saw it, a subtle shift in the cabin door, just a hairline crack, as though inviting him to look inside. Holt felt the pull again, stronger, magnetic, a command he could neither resist nor fully understand. Beyond that door lay the truth, not on maps, not in ledgers, not in polite conversation, but raw, unvarnished, and irrevocable. He stepped forward. The line had been crossed. There was no turning back. Holt's hand lingered on the rough-hewn latch, the cold wood biting against his palm, yet there was no hesitation in his movement. Something deep inside him, a primal part, long dormant, urged him forward. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every insect, every whispering leaf, every distant bird frozen in anticipation, as though the mountains themselves were witnesses to what was about to unfold. Inside, Holt imagined, lay not just a cabin, but the fulcrum of a secret so profound that it had resisted maps, censuses, and the passing of decades. The door creaked, a slow groan that sounded like the earth itself protesting intrusion, and Holt peered inside. Light from the fading sun spilled across the floorboards, illuminating a room both mundane and impossibly ordered. Every object had its place. The hearth with coals still warm from a recent fire, the small table neatly stacked with dishes, the shelves lined with books whose spines gleamed like sentinels in the dim light. Yet amid the ordinariness there was an undercurrent of menace, subtle and undeniable, as though the room itself was aware of him, watching, judging. Holt's eyes fell immediately on the hearth. A stone, slightly out of alignment, hinted at concealment. He knelt, brushing away the ash, and found the first clue, the wooden doll, its face smooth from handling, yet with an uncanny weight of presence. It was more than a toy. It was a remnant of life erased, a silent witness to the human stories that had been deliberately buried. Holt's pulse quickened as he traced the faint carvings on its back. Letters almost invisible, a cipher perhaps, or a mark of ownership, a signature left behind by some unknown hand. Percy, standing tensely behind him, whispered, "Holt, are we sure we should be doing this?" But Holt's voice was flat, commanding, not out of anger, but certainty. "We are here because someone tried to erase them. We are here because someone wanted this forgotten." The weight of those words pressed into the air between them, heavy as the humid mountain air, suffocating yet invigorating. They had crossed a threshold, one that would leave no part of them untouched by the darkness of what had been concealed. As Holt continued his search, the locket revealed itself next. Tucked beneath a floorboard near the bed, it gleamed faintly in the dying light. Fingers trembling, Holt pried it open, revealing the faded portraits, Clara and two children, staring back at him with a haunting innocence. Time had dulled their color, yet their eyes held questions, accusations, a silent demand for recognition. Holt's icy certainty gripped him. These items were not just keepsakes, they were evidence. Evidence of a human life deliberately erased, hidden, and controlled. A truth far darker than he had anticipated. The air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and Holt realized, with a clarity that chilled him, that the forest, the mountains, and Vance himself were all part of the same design, a cage for secrets, a sentinel for truths too dangerous for the world outside. He had descended into something far beyond curiosity. He had stepped into the heart of deliberate erasure, and there was no return. Every sound in the cabin, the crackle of the hearth, the faint rustle of wind through the cracks, even the creak of the floorboards, became an accomplice to the unfolding revelation. Holt understood then. The mountain had prepared him, the forest had watched, and the cabin awaited. The next discovery would change everything. Holt's fingers trembled as he held the locket, the portraits of Clara and her children burning into his mind like a brand. The weight of their gaze was unbearable, yet it forced him deeper into the truth he had been chasing. He knew instinctively that the cabin wasn't merely a home, it was a vault, a repository of memories, of lives erased, of stories deliberately removed from history. Each item, the doll, the locket, the books, the meticulously kept hearth, was a breadcrumb trail leading to a darkness the outside world was never meant to glimpse. Percy shifted uneasily behind him, his youthful bravado now replaced with a fear that seemed almost tangible. "Holt, this doesn't feel right. Why would someone hide them? Why would Vance keep these things?" His voice quavered, echoing off the walls, but Holt only shook his head. "Because, Percy, the world isn't as simple as maps and surveys. Power lies not in what is seen, but in what is hidden, and someone very clever, wanted these people forgotten." Holt's eye scanned the room again. There was an unnatural order to everything, an obsessive attention to detail that spoke of isolation, yes, but also control. Whoever Vance had been, he had constructed a world here, shielded from the laws of men, from the logic of government, from the very flow of time. It was a deliberate erasure. The mountains themselves seemed complicit, their peaks and hollows guarding secrets with an almost sentient intent. The doll rested in Holt's palm, small and fragile, yet horrifyingly potent. The thought struck him that a human life once lived could be wiped clean in the records, but its echoes, the laughter, the tears, the everyday minutiae, remained indelible in objects left behind. Each artifact was a whisper, a ghost of the past, a piece of truth that refused to die. Holt's pulse accelerated. He realized that he was no longer merely mapping terrain. He was mapping human erasure, the architecture of secrecy, the deliberate control of memory itself. He placed the doll gently back, then turned his attention to the books lining the shelves. Titles on ancient civilizations, forgotten sciences, and philosophical treatises stared back as if judging him. Holt recognized a pattern, a subtle alignment, as though Vance had intentionally left clues, guiding him towards understanding. Every object, every arrangement was deliberate, a psychological puzzle. Someone had been orchestrating this narrative for decades, maybe centuries, ensuring that those who came looking could only uncover the truth if they were perceptive enough, relentless enough. Percy's unease reached a tipping point. Holt, if we go any further, I don't know if we can come back the same. Holt's gaze hardened, eyes fixed on the floorboards beneath the bed where the locket had rested. We can't turn away, Percy. Once you see what has been hidden, what has been erased, it changes you. This is why they hid it, and this is why we must uncover it. A faint chill settled into the cabin, as though the mountains themselves had drawn a breath. The shadows from the hearth flickered violently, stretching and contorting like living things. Holt sensed, rather than saw, that they were being watched, not just by Vance, not just by the mountains, but by the very ghosts of history themselves. The cabin, the mountains, the forest, all were witnesses to a truth too dangerous for the world outside. And Holt understood, with a clarity that sent a shiver down his spine. The next step would take him into darkness far deeper than he had imagined.
Night had fallen like a suffocating shroud over the mountains, and the cabin seemed alive in the darkness, breathing, watching, waiting. Holt lit a small lantern, its dim glow illuminating dust motes that hung like frozen spirits in the air. Every creak of the logs, every groan of the settling cabin seemed magnified, echoing like warnings. Percy hunched closer to the fire, muttering prayers under his breath, while Holt's mind raced, analyzing, connecting, unearthing threads of hidden history that refused to remain buried. He returned to the locket, staring at the faded photographs. There was an unnatural stillness in the faces of Clara's children, a permanence that felt almost deliberate. Holt's instincts screamed at him. These were not merely forgotten lives. These were lives erased with purpose. Someone had chosen them, isolated them, and left fragments behind, almost taunting the world with evidence that should not exist. The mountains had absorbed this intent, holding the story like a sealed tomb, yet somehow whispering it to those who dared listen. Holt's thoughts spiraled. Maps could measure mountains, rivers, forests, but they could not measure the weight of human absence, the intentional void left in the world's record. And yet, someone had meticulously maintained these artifacts, leaving them accessible, as if daring the next intruder to piece together the truth. It was more than cruelty. It was a system, a method, a psychological control that transcended generations. Holt realized with a sinking certainty that he was witnessing the intersection of isolation, obsession, and unchallenged power. Percy's voice broke through, shaky and urgent. "Holt, what if he comes back and catches us? What if this is one of those places people never leave the same, or at all?" Holt's response was deliberate, cold, unwavering. Then we document it. We understand it. The world must see what is hidden, even if it's dangerous. Some truths are meant to be unearthed, Percy, even if they burn the minds of those who discover them. A shadow moved outside the cabin, subtle but deliberate, brushing against the line of the tree line. Holt froze, straining to see. Vance, he thought, though he knew the man rarely left the cabin at night. And yet there was intent in the movement, a silent reminder that they were intruding in a space that had always been sacred, a space carefully curated to contain memory and history, yet fiercely guarded from the outside world. Holt's heart pounded as he felt the weight of centuries pressing down, a psychological gravity rooted in secrecy, survival, and control. He understood that the mountains had not just concealed a home, they had concealed a system. One man, one family, one cabin, or perhaps a network of hidden truths, each suppressed, each protected by isolation and fear. And now, Holt and Percy were threads weaving themselves into that narrative, observers in a history that refused to acknowledge their presence. Holt leaned closer to Percy, his voice low and commanding, yet tinged with revelation. "Percy, repeat after me. The mountain keeps its secrets. Say it twice, say it slowly, let it anchor you." Percy hesitated, then whispered, the words trembling in the dark. "The mountain keeps its secrets. The mountain keeps its secrets." Holt nodded, satisfied, knowing the phrase was no idle mantra. It was a key, a ritual, a psychological alignment, a binding to the gravity of hidden knowledge. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The shadows deepened. Holt understood that this night, this cabin, these mountains, they would not release him unchanged. Every revelation, every artifact, every whispered story had already begun its work, and the deeper they went tomorrow, the closer they would come to truths too dangerous for any map to record. The forest held its breath, waiting.
Dawn crept over the peaks in a slow, imperceptible crawl, spilling muted light into the hollow where the cabin sat like a dark jewel. The mist hung low, curling around the trees in ghostly fingers, clinging to every root and fallen branch. Holt stepped outside, boots sinking into wet earth, feeling the oppressive quiet press against his chest. He could almost hear the mountains breathing, as if the world itself was aware of their intrusion, measuring them, judging them. Percy trailed behind, pale, anxious, a bundle of nerves tethered to Holt's relentless determination. The cabin had transformed overnight in Holt's mind. No longer merely an anomaly in the landscape, it had become a nexus, a focal point where secrecy, memory, and silence converged. Vance's existence was a deliberate omission, a living contradiction to every map, every record, every law of history. Holt thought of the locket and the doll, the quiet testimonies of lives erased, and he realized they were more than remnants of a hidden past. They were warnings. Whoever had erased this cabin from the official record had intended to control the narrative, to manipulate memory, to bend history itself to their will. Eli Greer appeared at the edge of the clearing, his silhouette a shadow among shadows. He did not speak immediately, only watched, his dark eyes scanning the cabin, the surveyors, the mountains beyond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, gravelly, carrying the weight of generations. "The world doesn't want to see some things," he said, almost to himself. "Places like this, people like him, they challenge the order, and order is powerful, sometimes too powerful to ignore." Holt understood immediately. This was not just about isolation or survival. This was about systems, systems of knowledge, systems of suppression, systems of power that stretched far beyond these mountains. Vance's cabin, unmapped, was a tiny rebellion against those systems, a solitary defiance preserved in stone, soil, and smoke. But the layers beneath it, Clara, her children,
The artifacts hidden in plain sight revealed a darker, more human side of control, the deliberate erasure of life, memory, and identity. Percy shivered and broke the silence. "Do you think he's the only one?" Holt didn't answer immediately. The thought was a cold blade against the spine. What if this cabin was one node in a network, one living secret among many? Each untold story, each vanished person, each deliberate omission from the world's records, what did it mean? Holt had seen enough to know the pattern of concealment was deliberate, surgical, methodical, and someone, somewhere, had orchestrated it with terrifying precision. Holt's hand rested on the locket in his satchel, the metal cold, the faded images inside burning in his mind. "Every omission has a reason," he murmured almost to himself. "Every erasure is intentional, and every secret has a guardian." He looked at Percy. "We've stepped into a game older than we can imagine, and the mountains are only the first gatekeepers." The wind picked up, carrying a whisper through the hollow. Holt felt it brush against his face like a cold hand, almost intelligible in its cadence. A warning, a promise. The cabin, the mountains, the missing histories, they were alive, sentient in a way the world outside could never comprehend. Holt's pulse quickened. This was no longer mapping. This was initiation. He turned to Percy, eyes burning. "Remember the phrase, repeat it, anchor yourself." Percy's voice quivered but obeyed. "The mountain keeps its secrets. The mountain keeps its secrets." Holt nodded. Yes, only those who acknowledge the gravity of hidden knowledge could survive its weight, and they were only beginning to understand the cost. The shadows of the forest shifted behind them. Holt felt the first true shiver of danger, the first taste of the unseen forces that had kept this place off every map.
The sun had barely cleared the ridge when Holt and Percy returned to the cabin, each step through the damp underbrush thick with tension. Everything felt amplified, the earthy scent of pine, the faint rustle of unseen creatures, the distant caw of a lone crow echoing like a warning. Holt's mind raced with fragments of information, half-formed theories, and a gnawing sense that they were now intruders in a world that had long learned to defend itself. Vance was there, as always, silent, deliberate, his pale blue eyes reflecting the flickering firelight even in the harsh morning sun. Holt noticed almost immediately the subtle signs of preparation in Vance's routine. The garden had been tended with care, weeds pulled, soil freshly turned, each row of beans and corn aligned with quiet precision. It was mundane on the surface, domestic even, but in the context of isolation, it carried the weight of ritual, of a life conducted under surveillance by forces unseen. Every detail of the cabin, every object was deliberate, nothing accidental. Holt's fingers itched to touch, to examine, to record. Every artifact in this cabin was a key to understanding, and he would not leave it unexplored. Percy, for his part, hung back, glancing nervously toward the distant forest, as though anticipating the sudden intrusion of someone or something intent on correcting their presence. "Holt, this feels wrong," he whispered, voice trembling. "We shouldn't be here. There's a reason he's not on any map. There's a reason she and the children disappeared. This isn't just history. It's alive." Holt didn't answer. He could not afford the luxury of fear. Fear was the tool of those who controlled what was known and what remained buried. Vance, sensing the shift in Holt's focus, finally spoke, his voice slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of a lifetime in these mountains. "You dig too deep, Mr. Holt. Some things," he paused, letting the words hang like a suspended blade, "were never meant to be understood by outsiders. Some truths are the property of the mountains, not of men."
His gaze swept over the survey instruments, the maps, the carefully notated measurements. Holt recognized the quiet authority in that statement, the assertion that knowledge is power, and power is controlled, jealously, ruthlessly. It was then Holt noticed the subtle anomaly in the hearth, a loose stone, one he hadn't paid attention to the day before. His pulse quickened. With careful hands, he pried it free. Behind it, a hidden cavity revealed itself, a small wooden box, aged, the edges worn. He opened it slowly. Inside were documents, yellowed and brittle, written in a spidery, almost archaic hand. Names, dates, locations, accounts of people and events that had no place in official records, evidence of deliberate erasure, manipulation, and concealment. Holt felt the weight of the discovery settle like a stone in his chest. This cabin wasn't simply a secret, it was a vault, a repository of truths too dangerous for the outside world. And Vance, silent, vigilant, calculating, was the guardian. Holt's rational mind quivered. The implications were staggering. If this knowledge got out, it could topple reputations, rewrite histories, unravel the very structures of authority that governed society. The line between wilderness and civilization blurred. Percy broke the silence again, softer this time, almost reverential. "Holt, what does this mean? Who decides what gets erased?" Holt did not answer immediately. The question was not rhetorical, it was existential. They had stepped into a theater of control, where maps were lies, records were illusions, and the mountains themselves were conspirators. Holt's eyes returned to the documents. He spoke, voice low and commanding. "We are the witnesses now, and we will carry the truth, whether the world is ready or not." Holt's hands trembled slightly as he sifted through the fragile pages, each one a puzzle piece of a history deliberately shredded and hidden. Names he recognized, families that should have appeared in census records, merchants, preachers, even local officials were crossed out, erased, or annotated with cryptic symbols he could not yet decipher. Lines of ink ran into one another, as if the author of these records had been interrupted mid-gesture, leaving a trace of panic, of urgency, preserved in the paper itself. Holt felt it keenly. These weren't just omissions, they were warnings. The erasure was intentional, systematic, and centuries in the making. Percy hovered behind him, silent, his unease palpable. "Holt, this is more than a cabin, isn't it?" His words hung in the thick, wood-scented air. Holt did not answer immediately. He was too absorbed, tracing the jagged lines of names, the odd spacing, the deliberate ambiguity in the entries. There were notes that hinted at alliances, debts, disputes, hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic language, entries that seemed innocuous on the surface, but betrayed a deep undercurrent of control. The mountains weren't just a wilderness, they were a fortress for secrets, a shield for power. Then Holt found it, a ledger, smaller, tucked between two larger tomes, its leather cracked and stiff. Opening it, he saw names he recognized from local folklore, whispered in hushed tones by old-timers at county fairs and taverns. Some were missing, some vanished entirely. Others appeared, only to disappear again in the following lines, as if the ledger itself were alive, correcting reality to suit the will of unseen authorities. Holt's chest tightened. He realized the stakes. This cabin, its keeper, and the mountains surrounding them weren't simply forgotten. They were deliberately hidden, an active attempt to control what men could know, what histories could exist. Vance watched silently from across the room, eyes pale, unreadable, yet burning with the awareness that Holt had uncovered something he had been guarding for decades. "You're meddling where you shouldn't," he said softly. There was no anger, only a calm menace, the certainty of a man who understood that knowledge alone was power, and that some truths are dangerous precisely because they unsettle the foundation of control. Holt's gaze met his. He had already crossed the line. There was no going back. Holt's fingers lingered on the ledger. He could feel the weight of generations pressing down upon him, the compulsion to preserve these secrets clashing with a growing visceral understanding. Some knowledge is corrosive. It seeps into the mind, reshapes perception, fractures certainty. Percy shivered, whispering, "We shouldn't even be seeing this." Holt nodded slowly, acknowledging the fear, but also recognizing the irresistible call of forbidden knowledge. He closed the ledger carefully, but the unease did not fade. Holt looked out the cabin window at the forest beyond, the mountains steep and foreboding, shrouded in mist. Somewhere in that darkness, histories vanished, lives erased, legacies suppressed, all under the silent watch of the wilderness. He understood now. Maps, records, governments, they were secondary. The real control was ancient, hidden, and implacable. And now, Holt and Percy were part of its unfolding. Holt turned to Percy, voice low but firm, almost a whisper. "Whatever we do next, we walk in a shadow. The moment you step beyond what you know, the world changes, and not always for the better." Percy swallowed hard, the truth of the words sinking in like cold stone. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it an unspoken warning. Holt understood. They were no longer just surveyors. They were witnesses, participants, and, perhaps unwillingly, inheritors of a power they could scarcely comprehend.